We're here with Mark Begich and his campaign headquarters here in Midtown, and we're going to be interviewing him on his race for governor. Mark, I want to thank you for joining us here.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. I know you're busy.
Our fancy office here.
Should I want to start with? Should I call you mayor or senator?
Mark is fine.
Okay. Do you remember the first time we met?
Probably don't. No, I probably don't.
Many years ago, I worked at Platinum Jacks as a
you were a doorman. Yeah.
You came in, it was 2006.
Yeah, with a group of folks from the ACVB banquet.
Yeah, and you came in late, and I was working, and I just didn't know much about politics, but I knew you were the mayor, and I said hi to you, and you said, hey, I really appreciate your support, and you talked to me for a few minutes, so I'll never forget that.
We came over from a Convention and Visitors Bureau annual event, and so we came in, if I remember right, we were wearing tuxedos.
You were all dressed up, right. I just remember, that's the mayor. I didn't know much about politics back then, but...
Oh, that's great. Well, we had a great crew with us. We had someone from who owned the Peanut Farm, the guy who owns Tasty Freeze, and a few others.
Yeah, it was. I'll never forget that.
We didn't cause any trouble, did we?
No, you guys were.
Okay.
I was pretty busy working. But
oh, good. We weren't kicked out.
No, okay. You didn't get. If it was me, I might have got kicked out. So I want to start with, there's a lot of speculation leading up to the filing deadline about you getting in the race. You filed on June 1st, a deadline, and I guess the question a lot of folks want to know is, why'd you get in the race, and why are you running for governor?
Yeah, I got in the race because I don't think there's a long-term vision for Alaska. When you look at some of the issues we're dealing with, maybe the fiscal stability, but take crime, which we're now #1 in the nation, which is not a statistic you want to have. We're on the bottom of the rung when it comes to education. When you look at unemployment, we're the highest in the nation. All these statistics told me that there's not a real comprehensive look at where we're going as a state. There's a lot of legislative battles. You've seen them over the last several years, these special sessions that keep popping up and working through. But there's not a vision of where we need to go. If we're going to keep young people here working, if we're going to have a diversified economy, you have to look at this in a broad sweep. So I got into the race because I believe that I could offer the voters a choice, something to vote for, something that they could embrace in the sense of a long-term plan for Alaska, and not always talking about the same old stuff. Now, I'm sure we will talk about some of that a little bit today, but the goal that I have is to talk about the issues that I'm hearing from everyday Alaskans, and it is about education, it's about crime, it is about the permanent fund, stability in the fiscal arena, how do we keep young people. So I got in because I felt I could offer something a little different, but also a bright, better future, and I believe that we as a state can do better than where we're at today.
So, many Democrats and progressives have raised some concerns in a three-way race with you and Walker and Dunleavy, that you and Walker, would split the vote, and if Dunleavy won the primary, he would win the race. Why are they wrong, and what do you see as your path to victory?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in three-way races before. I've seen three-way races. I've won three-way races. I think when I look at this race, it is clear to me that as voters start to see the differences, but also what we offer and what I offer as a long-term vision for Alaska, we're seeing people gravitating to our campaign. I think every poll we've seen usually puts us in first or second position in the three-way race. We've spent very little money compared to our opponents. You have Dunleavy, who spent, well, his brother has spent $500,000 or more. Then you have the governor and Byron, who have spent about $450,000. We spent, under $30,000, $40,000 total. That's it. And being in first and second position, that is a good sign for us. It's an indication that we can win this race. We don't need to get 50%, and we just need to get our percentage to win. We think it's somewhere between 38 and 42%. We're, like I said, first and second usually in the polls. I feel like we have a message that Alaskans are looking for. They've heard all the, on the national level, you hear all this negative grumbling and everyone kind of mad at each other, throwing grenades back and forth, and that's bled down into local and state politics. You see now Treadwell and Dunleavy fighting each other. You see Walker and Dunleavy going back and forth, and what we're trying to do is give a positive view of what's possible for Alaska, and I think that's how we win.
So how much do you think it helps you that you're the only Democrat in the primary, and your running mate Deborah Call is the only Democrat in the Lieutenant Governor primary? How do you feel like that helps?
I mean that we don't have a Democrat in the primary. Well, it's an advantage to a certain extent because you're not fighting a battle with another candidate in your race right now. But honestly, because we got in late, our opponents have, outraised us for sure, and will continue to probably outraise us. And their groups will spend more money than we will. So our task has to be that not having a primary opponent is helpful because we can spend the time calling voters, going out to voters, doing town hall meetings. One of the things I've done during this election. You know, we've had fundraisers like others, but you don't have to come to a fundraiser to come talk to me about issues. We did town hall meetings, meet and greets. We had one on public safety this last week. 50 people showed up to talk about their concerns. It wasn't a fundraiser. Come talk to us about what you're concerned about. Last night we had one in Palmer on education. 50, 60 people showed up at that one. We had one in Homer, two in Homer actually. Ended up with over 100 people at those, one in Bethel. So I think, you know, not having a primary opponent, both myself and Deborah Call, give us an ability to get out there and talk to people about our issues and not get caught into a back and forth campaign.
So you've served on the Anchorage Assembly. You were the teacher mayor of Anchorage. You were in the U.S. Senate. You know, they say governors make the best presidents. Do mayors make the best governors? And what do you feel like in all your government service is the most relevant to being governor?
Well, I think the public service is important, but also I've been in the business world since the age of 14, and I think that entrepreneurial spirit is what you need, especially right now with Alaska. You cannot just have all this government experience and hope it all works. The combination of the two, I think, is important. I think being mayor clearly gives me some great experience of being an executive, running a large operation. We had 3,000 employees under the city government. We had several $100 million budgets. We had utilities. You know, it was pretty broad range. Plus you had to deal with the legislative body, in this case the Assembly. So you understand the power of the office, but you understand also how to create a vision for the city. You know, when I came in as mayor, we transformed the city into a 21st century that was able to sustain the downturn of the economy nationwide. I think Alaska is in that same position. They need a governor that thinks about the future and is willing to think of transformational ideas, not just business as usual, find some money, hope it all works, but actually look at how we manage and deliver our services. You know, why are young people waiting a year and a half to get into a nursing program when it's one of the fastest growing industries, healthcare? We should figure out how to re-engineer our education system to meet the needs of young people. I think that is a business experience, but also it's combined with the knowledge of being a mayor. Now, flip that on top, this national experience I've had, I think with Alaska, because we are a state, but we are a state in a global economy. And I think that's important. So when you're talking about, for example, the president who's put tariffs on our fishing industry, costing us $700 million, the governor right now should be actively working with the governors of Washington, Oregon, the Gulf states, which are predominantly Republican, and the Democrats on the West Coast, creating a coalition to push back on the Trump administration and trying to use the levers of Washington, which I'm very familiar with, to get us out of that tariff so we can have our fish being sold at a reasonable rate. That's the experiences that I bring into this that is very powerful.
You know, speaking of the tariffs, I mean, China is Alaska's biggest trading partner.
That's right.
You know, where do you think these tariffs are going to impact fishing, our exporting of fish, potentially any gas line that might happen with the steel and with the Chinese involvement?
Well, we're caught in a global war here in the sense that, you know, you have the Trump administration upset with China, China upset with the Trump administration. Really, it also is based around North Korea and what's going on there, also the investments that China's making in Africa. This is a combination of things. So for us as Alaskans, we're getting pinched in this global game. And as a governor who, you know, if I'm sitting in that office, I understand a lot of those folks in Washington and worked with them and how we use that to our advantage to get out from underneath these tariffs, or how to make sure that if we're ever going to build a pipeline that we're not stuck paying more because of the steel we're buying from China. You know, on top of that, this is an interesting thing. This year, Russia will determine with some action they can take, will they sell or will they buy Alaska fish? Right now they don't buy Alaska fish. Now we buy their fish, the country does, but we're not allowed to sell into Russia.
Right.
And we should be doing something about that. So in a lot of ways, all these impact us. And as a governor, you can't just kind of hone in only on what's going on in Juneau. You got to look at the global picture because we're touched by all that. And so I think you bet these tariffs are impacting us. They create a higher cost for our goods and product. And for a state that has incredible trading relations with China, as well as many other countries, we got to make sure we have as much free opportunity to trade our goods and get the best price for them.
All right, I want to go into to crime. Obviously, crime is maybe one of the biggest issues in this election. You know, you've hosted a couple crime town halls recently. What do you attribute the rise in crime to? And how do we fix that?
Well, there's no question. No, we're number one in the nation now when you compare us to any other state, and that's impacting people's decisions of their quality of life here. You know, I'm not going to say that the 3,000 people that left the state last year left because of the crime issues, but it is a contributing factor. So I think what causes is a multi-layered effect. First off, we have the highest unemployment in the nation, and that is going to have some impact on crime. Second, 80% of the folks that end up in our correctional institutions are substance abuse in some form, drugs or alcohol or a combination. We also have, I think, a lack and lost opportunity and hope in our state. There's not a vision of where we're headed. If you ask people today, as an Alaskan, what are we going to be 10 years from now? And if you don't instill part of that, then you do have a situation where people are wondering what's going to happen next, and there's a little bit of hopelessness. Now, put all that aside, we have now functionary problems. The state usually looks at, you know, troopers, corrections, village police officers, kind of in this narrow cast. But public safety is much broader than that. You got to be coordinating with your local governments and what they're doing. For example, in Anchorage, as the mayor adds more police officers, the state closed down the courthouse 1 day a week. That doesn't make sense. If you're going to bring more people through the system, you actually have to have a courthouse that's open. So our approach and my approach would be very simple. And not only have we had town hall meetings, we've laid out a detailed plan on our website, begich.com, that lays this all out. But you got to look at it from a holistic standpoint, both local, both in the cities and villages, what we can do there. We have to actually fill right away, as quickly as possible, the vacant positions that are fully funded. We have 40 state trooper positions fully funded. They're finally about to get an academy to do some of those, but the reality is 40 are empty right now, fully funded. In the corrections institution down in Seward, 20 positions fully funded but not filled. I can go through the list. You have to fill those as quickly as possible. And last, you got to also, with the village police officers and the VPs that are working for the tribes, we do have to create some standards of quality because you don't want this mixed bag of some people have background checks, some don't, some can do it voluntarily. No, public safety, if I'm in a village or I'm in a city, I want to know who's ever protecting me is of the highest ethical standards and have the quality experiences they need. And I've suggested an idea that I think would be interesting. We should take village police officers and bring them into urban areas to work with police officers here for a week or two. It doesn't matter, Anchorage, Fairbanks, Juneau, Kenai, wherever, and do the reverse. So we create this exchange and understanding that public safety is not limited to just your community.
Right. So, you know, a lot of people are, you know, blaming the rising crime on SB 91, but it started before SB 91.
Yeah.
Do you think SB 91, what impact do you think it had? And, you know, are you kind of part of, I think you told KTVA you want to repeal it and maybe look at starting over? And what's your view on SB 91?
You know, it's interesting. You're going to see in every campaign, other than ours, only talking about SB 91 as that's the solution. Well, it's interesting, a lot of those legislators have a little bit of amnesia. They might have forgotten they actually voted for it, and now they're all against it. And it's because of their own inability, both from the governor down to the legislature. And that is, when you have a piece of legislation that you believe might have some impact, especially for first-time offenders or individuals that might have substance abuse issues, you actually have to put the resources to it. You can't just say we're going to pass a law and magic will happen. And they basically implemented it poorly. Now the law is so convoluted. They've tried to amend it, as you know, with 54, right? And what I have said is, look, you cannot fix something that's so broken. What you should do is step back, look at the whole system, and figure out what we're going to do here. And the answer to this is repealing SB 91 does not solve the problem. It does deal with some of the legislation that some people are concerned about, because some of the car thefts and so forth got to lower crime status, which is a problem, because you do have to have penalties for these kinds of crimes.
And that's what people are frustrated with, is people commit a crime and
nothing happens.
It's a non-violent crime, but they get released right away, and this is the frustration I think
right.
People.
But even before SB 91, 65, 67% of the people that end up in state system, even when I was mayor, that was still happening with the state system. 65 to 67% of the people that end up in the state correctional institutions reoffend, because that tells you systematic problems with the system. Well, we did one idea, which I'll implement as governor. We did it as mayor. We knew the hardened criminal, guns, gangs, drugs, activity. That's a business to them. So you have to really get in there and disrupt it. So what did I do when I was mayor? We had 2 city prosecutors, work for the federal U.S. Attorney's Office to prosecute those people. Why did we do that? Because if you get prosecuted under federal law for those, it's 10-year minimums, and you get sent to Oklahoma in some state or federal penitentiary. If you were in the state system, you'd be out in 6 months or less. So what did that do? It sent a message on the street that we were serious about these hardened criminals, and we're going to send you away for a long time. If you ask any police officer that had worked during that time, they'll tell you the impact was incredibly positive, because the street is like a business, and you disrupt it, you make it uncomfortable, you drive that bad element out. That's what you got to do. But on top of that, you have people who are first-time offenders who want to get help in their substance abuse issues, and we should deal with that through wellness courts and other programs. So this problem did not start, as you said, with SB 91. It's been going on systematically because the system from the state only looks at their state resources. We have to look at this from a holistic point and draw the community in and deal with this in a much more aggressive way.
This interview is brought to you by Alaska Fast Cash. With the best deals on tools, electronics, jewelry, Blu-rays, and DVDs, Alaska Fast Cash, with stores in Anchorage, Wasilla, and Fairbanks. Now back to the interview. All right, let's go. I'm going to the PFD issue, another big issue. You know, after the price of oil crashed, Governor Walker vetoed a portion of the PFD, a very unpopular decision. Since then, the legislature appropriated a smaller dividend than the historical formula for the last 2 years. Do you agree with the governor did and what the legislature did? And do you think the permanent fund should be the old historical formula?
Yeah.
And should a portion of the earnings go to fund government?
Yeah, no, I don't agree with what they did, and here's why. First off, the way you made the question, because prices of oil went down, which affected the operating budget.
Well, there was a huge major deficit,
right?
$1 billion deficit.
But the permanent fund did not solve that problem by vetoing it. That just went back into the permanent fund. It didn't go into operations. So I want to make, because some people believe that went in to solve the budget deficit. It did not. Here's why I disagree.
Because someone say it earned more money.
It earned more money.
It didn't get spent for government.
Right. Here is, there's really 3 plans on the permanent fund. You got the Dunleavy plan, which I think is reckless and dangerous because he doesn't explain at the end of the day, when the state has a $2 billion deficit under his plan, how he's going to pay for that. If it's going to be cutting the budget, you got to cut 35% of the budget, which means if you think problems now with troopers, public safety, road maintenance, go through the list, add up more, it's not going to happen. Also, he puts at risk the dividend in a longer term. The governor and the legislature did a plan, SB 26, which in my view is still dangerous because the
percent of market value.
Yeah, percent of market value, which I don't disagree with the formula, but here's what it does. It leaves it in the hands of these guys. It leaves it in the hands of the legislature, which means what they tell you this year can change next year. This has been the problem. And their pattern is pretty similar to what's been going on. They spent $14 billion of the Constitutional Budget Reserve, or the savings account, leaving $2 billion because it's money sitting on the table. They spent it. Under this scenario, the reserve account has almost $18 billion in it, that they just need a simple majority. So this does not solve the problem of how to deal with this issue, because every year they're going to have to deal with the permanent fund dividend or fill the budget gap and not deal with the hard issues. So what's my plan? Mine's very, I think, simple, and that is you have 2 funds within the permanent fund. You have the corpus, and then you have the reserve. I'd take a sizable amount of that reserve, shove it into the corpus. Why would I do that? Because once it's in the corpus, no one can touch that other than the voters make that decision. Second, I would use the percent of market value. I'd take 50% of that, put it to a constitutionally guaranteed dividend, which is sustainable, which this year would have been $1,800, $1,900, and growing because it'd be inflation adjusted. The other half, instead of leaving that money to the willy-nilly of the legislature or the governor, I would dedicate that to education funding. By pushing that money into education and the Constitution guaranteeing the education money as well as the dividend, you've taken those 2 numbers out of the GF, or the education money out of the GF, general fund. Now you probably still have, no matter how you cut it, well, today on the 75, you wouldn't have the deficit. You'd be within a few a few $1 million.
That's the price of oil.
Yeah, if it stays this, but let's just say it's at the 60 or 65, range. You're going to have some deficit. Will you need revenues? Yes. What that will look like, I can't tell you at this point, except I will say this. Every revenue idea that the governor has put forward has failed the legislature because there's not been this comprehensive plan. You can't do these things before you deal with the dividend, so the public understands what the long term is on that. You have to deal, and I believe this, with the money sitting in the reserve account, if it's sitting there for them to freely take every year, you can't do that. The public won't buy it. Then once you solve that problem, the next thing you must do is show to the public. I just had this conversation with someone from Fairbanks today. You have to show to the public that you are spending all the money correctly, meaning that you're doing everything that you can to make sure there's no waste in the system. I can tell you there's lots of things you can do to reshape and re-engineer government, and you have to show that to the voters. Once you do that, then you can go to the next and last stage if you need it, and that is, what's that revenue stream? There's talk of income tax, sales tax, seasonal sales tax, head tax for education. I'm not, I'd be happy to look at all of them in whatever way that we can figure this out jointly with the legislature, but the idea of a wage tax that was proposed was a dumb idea. I think the idea of a gas tax, even though people will tell us what the lowest level, who that impacts is a lot of rural Alaska and a lot of moderate to low income families because they don't get a choice.
And that was my next question actually was, you mentioned the governor and the legislature, they've had a kind of stressed relationship. Let's say if you were to win and the House or Senate were to be controlled by Republicans, how would you work with them?
Yeah.
Knowing that a lot of them are very, very, very critical of Mark Begich.
Well, they're critical because they don't like when I win. They're not necessarily critical. That one thing you'll find with them, and I think if you ask them, they'll tell you, yep, we may not like his politics at times, but he's, I'm straightforward. I tell him what I think. I'm honest about what I do. I don't flip-flop. They get my views on it, but I'm also willing to work with them and figure out solutions. I think this is where the current legislature and governor are having problems. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, there's a lot of problems in communication. Think about this. When I was in the U.S. Senate, I had to deal with people from Bernie Sanders to Ted Cruz. And everything we wanted to do, we got done. And that was what, if it was making sure we had F-16s and F-35s going up to Fairbanks, or making sure that the National Petroleum Reserve could open up, or didn't matter if it was making sure we got veterans serving in our getting service out of tribal clinics around the state. You could pick the issue. I had to work with a lot of different people to make that happen. When I was mayor, it used to be, well, I'll even go back a little further. When I was in the assembly, Tom Fink was the mayor at that time when I was on the assembly, and the majority of the assembly at one point was Republican. And I remember a lot of them measured their success, which I thought was odd, how many vetoes they'd have against Tom Fink, 50, 60. When I became chair, I had 6. And the reason is because I sat down every single day or every single week with the mayor, Mayor Tom Fink, and we talked about the issues and we figured out where we could agree and where we couldn't. Then we'd go fight it out on the legislative body. When I was mayor, I only had 1 veto. That was it. And that was because they wouldn't let the person, my chief of police, speak on a liquor license that should have been revoked. 3 years later, Fannie's on 5th did close. That's the one I wanted revoked, because they knew I was willing to sit down with them. And I had a cross-section of people that I had to work with. That's the same way I'll approach in the legislature. Republican, Democrat, Independent, doesn't matter to me. What we're going to do is figure out where Alaska is going to go and how we're going to do it together. There's going to be times when we agree, and there's times when we disagree. Also, I'll sit down with them before the sessions start, which will be a refreshing idea for them, and that is sitting down and asking what their priorities are. How do we get to their needs? That's not being done right now. What's being done right now is, here's our agenda, the governor down to the legislature, and hope it all works. My view is, if you want to have successful and efforts in moving Alaska forward on education or building an economy, whatever the subject matter is, you actually have to sit down with folks who you may not politically agree with, but you're going to have to find the common ground. And that's what I do best.
You recently made an appearance at the Salmon Fest. The Supreme Court recently ruled that the Stand for Salmon ballot initiative will be on the November ballot with a few changes. How do you feel about that Stand for Salmon? I think Deborah Call said she was against it. Do you have a position on that? Are you going to vote for it? Or against it?
Here's what I said. First off, I think it was a great event down there. It goes on, as you know, every year. I've been an opponent to the Pebble Mine project, which is a big issue of Salmon Fest, and continue to be, and I think there are efforts that we should do on Pebble Mine to make sure that doesn't happen. On Prop 1, which has now just come out out of the courts just yesterday, as we're doing this interview, I'm going to spend a little time looking at it, but I will say this. I do believe in the initiative process. Voters should have the right to vote on initiatives that come forward. What that usually is a signal to the legislative body or the governor or both that they have failed to do their job. When initiatives happen, It is the process for the public to redress their government. Now, you can agree or disagree with the subject matter, but this is how they can address it. What's interesting about this is there's two initiatives moving. Prop 1, and if you remember, there was another initiative moving, which would have restricted their per diem, their pay, the ethics ones, right? But somehow when it mattered to their budget, their pocketbook, their own incomes, they solved that problem right away. They jumped right on that.
Well, in fact, that initiative got knocked down because the legislation that was passed was
Right.
very similar to the initiative.
Right, because they realized this could affect their own personal income. Instead, which was fine, okay, that's what they wanted to choose. Here's one that could affect our economy, pro or con, depending on how you look at it, and they didn't do anything. And yet Title 16, which this reflects, hasn't been revised since statehood. Well, it's never been revised. Statehood is when it was originally done. You'd think they'd want to sit down with a broad policy like that and try to fix it, but they didn't. They only did it when it affected them personally, in their own pocketbooks. That's what's wrong with the system. So it's going to end up on the ballot. That's fine with me. I'm going to review it over the next few days, but I do see the major pieces that the industry was concerned about was yanked out. Now it seems to me, and I'm doing some more review on it, and that is it allows public process. Now some might say that's more time to a project, and that's a concern. You don't want to over-time projects out. But it allows, for example, when a permit now is issued by the state, that actually the public will be notified. You actually have to put a bond up. You know, if you build a house in this town, you got to put a bond up to make sure you actually finish the project.
I think the industry folks were concerned that the language
was very restrictive.
And they might not be able to even do a Prudhoe Bay today or
right.
anything.
And that's why those sections that were unconstitutional were the most egregious to the industry. Those were taken out. And now the question is, what is the concern? And I'm anxious, I haven't heard that yet because it just came out last night. I've heard from some within the industry and some within the environmental community, but both of them are kind of, what does this all mean yet? Mm-hmm. But it's going to be on the ballot. I'll take a look at it in the next few days when it's finalized, because the language is going to be finalized at some point here.
So you got a tough Senate race in 2014, and it was the most expensive race in Alaska's history. All things considered,
this will be the cheapest.
This will be cheaper than that one for sure.
Yes.
Everything considered on that, I know it was a tough race.
Yeah.
How do you feel, Senator? You were there 6 years. How do you feel Senator Sullivan's doing in the Senate?
Well,
in 4 years.
I'm not going to. I'm running for governor, and I would say this: that the
voters. I was just curious.
Sure, but the voters will make that call in 2 years from now. They'll see and determine if he's doing a good job or a bad job. I think what's most important about being in public office, no matter if you're a senator, governor, mayor, you need to be back with the people and not just in programmed events. You need to be out there. One thing I pride myself on, didn't matter what office I served in, I was always out in the community at a variety of different places. I'm not afraid to go wherever people are to have a concern that they want to talk about. And I think that's an important part. And I think voters will judge anyone who's running at any point like this cycle. They'll judge the incumbent on his ability to perform or not. I think in 2 years they'll judge Sullivan on his ability, and 2 years after that, Lisa Murkowski. This year they're judging Don Young, and I think all of them will have their own. I think Washington has gotten worse in a lot of ways. I mean, the deficit this year is going to be up to $1 trillion. When I left 4 years ago, it was around 400 and going down billion. It's gone up from there to $1 trillion, and people like you and I are going to pay that. Interest rates are up, which means it affects home buying, affects your credit card rates, all that. That's all gone up in the last few years. The ability as a small business, because the government's sucking up so much capital out of the market, that getting small business loans gets tighter and tougher and more expensive. Student loan costs are going up. So we'll let the voters decide in a couple of years.
Obviously you come from a very political family. You've served in many positions. Your brother's in the state senate. Your dad was the congressman, before the tragic loss of the plane. Mm-hmm. I just want to ask, how much of your political career has been inspired, or because of your dad?
Well, obviously, I was 10 when he died. My mother was 34 years old, had to raise 6 kids. So, the impact is both not only from my mother, but obviously from my father, not only from a young boy's perspective, but over the years hearing from people and hearing their descriptions of his service. And what always I'm reminded of is his service was about serving Alaska and not about the politics of the day. Because I think if you serve the politics of the day, you get swayed one way or another that may not be good for the long-term health of the state. when he took on the issue of the Native Land Claims Act, when everyone told him it's not possible to get done in less than 2 years, it became law. That is an amazing feat after decades of trying it. What reminds me and kind of encourages me all the time is no matter what the odds are, if you work hard, you lay your ideas out, you talk to people, you communicate with them, you engage them, that the ability to move forward in many issues is possible. I think that is the legacy of my father, and obviously my mother ran for Congress twice, and that is a legacy that I think continues to this day. When I go out to rural Alaska, I have people, just last week when I was up in a couple of villages, that would come up to me and say, I met your father, and then they'd say from what village or where they're from. And I think that also reminds me of what I said earlier. Elected officials can't hide in Juneau, can't hide in Washington, D.C. They need to be out and about, and not just at the chamber, no disrespect to the groups like that, but really out at things that are not the norm, where people who are working every single day don't have the time to go to those things, but want to connect with their elected official. I think my dad's legacy is a lot about that.
So, unless some, drastic changes, it's going to be a three-way race. I think you're saying some similar stuff with the PFD and crime as Dunleavy, but you guys, everybody has different positions. Why should Alaskans vote for you? What's your path, and why should Alaskans vote for you?
First I would say the Dunleavy plan on the permanent fund is reckless and unsustainable. You will lose your dividend in the next decade based on his plan. He leaves a $2 billion budget gap, which means more state troopers are going to be cut, more correction officers will be cut, less money for road maintenance. I can go through the list. So I don't want to say we're similar in that arena. On the second,
I mean the dividend is a big issue for you. And
yeah, big issue.
The crime
is a big issue. Again, I would challenge Senator Dunleavy to lay out his, what's he going to do? Just being against SB 91 is not good enough. That's a great start, but not the end solution to how you deal with crime. So what I would say to voters, and I say it all the time where I go out, what you get with me is an incredible level of enthusiasm. You get an ability, high energy. You get an ability to look at things from an entrepreneurial standpoint, but also this vast experience in public office. You get this experience of working with people and figuring out very diverse issues and how to solve them. You see, and I put it out there and I'm not afraid to, when I talk about issues around education, I talk about crime or the economy. It's real concrete ideas, not just a slogan, not just a one-liner on a brochure, but here's what I want to do, but I want to engage people in that. I think the last and final is there's no campaign talk. I mean, they'll say the one-liner about the future of Alaska, but then you ask them, what is that? What's their view? You don't really hear that. What you hear is the repetitive statement of the future of Alaska. What I like to tell people and lay out is, I believe there's an incredible future here. But you also have to say to people, here's how I think we can get there. Join me on this journey and we will get there. We will transform this state to a state that's not on the bottom of all these statistics, but on the top of these statistics. It's a place where young people want to stay and live and work. It's a place where people no longer look at our education system at the bottom of the rung, but the top. Where people feel comfortable that they can know when they leave their car outside locked that it won't be broken in and stolen tomorrow. That's the future I see, that we can change this, transform it, engage people. I can't do it without the help of Alaskans. It's going to be a tough race, I know it, but that's what I want to see and that's what I hope for. I think we are talking about something so much different than the rest of the candidates that are caught into what I call the Juneau political fights. What I want to talk about is what Alaska's about and where we're going to go.
All right, well, Mark, I appreciate you sitting down with me and doing the interview. And
great.
Maybe we'll bump into you at a club here or something.
Yeah, there we go. You never know.
For some big event.
Or maybe, Arctic Roadrunner's closing in a week or so. I'm going to go over there again. It's one of my favorite places. And I was there last week and it was just packed. And I'll miss it because it's right over there next to the school I went to. And I used to go there for lunch because we had no cafeteria.
Great burgers.
It's the great burgers. And you can always get as many pickles as you want because they gave them free.
All right, well, Mark, I really appreciate you sitting down with us and doing the interview. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Thank you very much.